Hey everyone, this is Tapan Sharma here, and welcome to a new tutorial about building a mini students management system using Laravel, Livewire, Tailwind CSS, and Alpine.js. So yeah, in short, we'll be using the tall stack to build out this students management system, and we'll be using some new features offered by Livewire version 3, like form objects and the SPA feature, that is the wire navigate feature provided by Livewire. And yeah, we'll be using those stuff to build out this project, and I believe that you'll learn some new stuff along the way. So talking about the project, we'll start by installing and setting up Laravel and Livewire, and then we will look at defining the models, migrations, and the seeders. And later we'll start by displaying the data, and we'll also look at implementing paginations, and we'll also look at creating the records. So along the way, we'll look at implementing validations and how to implement dependent dropdowns in Livewire. So yeah, we'll be looking into these, and we'll also look at editing and updating the records. So yeah, this is gonna be an interesting one, and yeah, we'll also look at deleting the records. So we'll build out this CRUD project from scratch, and while building this project, we'll also work with form objects and how to define a dedicated form object for the creation and editing flow. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting one, and in the next part we'll start by setting up Laravel and Livewire. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, so let's start by creating a fresh Laravel project since we are starting a new project. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a new project, and I'm going to be using Laravel installer to install a fresh Laravel project. So yeah, let's go ahead and type in Laravel, and I'm going to name this project as Livewire Alpine Data Tables. You can name it anything you want, but in this case, I think this is a good name. So yeah, I'm going to be defining it as Livewire Alpine Data Tables. Let's go ahead and hit enter, and in this case, I'm going to be using the Laravel Breeze starter kit because it provides us with a lot of configurations already installed, like Tailwind CSS, the navigation menu, and the registration and login functionality. So yeah, we'll be using those while we build out this project. So here I'm going to be using Laravel Breeze, and we won't be using the Volt class API or functional API because we actually won't use them, but I will use the basic functionalities of Livewire and add in new features as we move along. So yeah, we'll be using the Bleed with Alpine stack and later add in Livewire and work with more features. So yeah, let's choose that, and I don't need dark mode support, and the testing framework doesn't really matter in this case, but still I'm going to choose best. And yeah, I would like to initialize a Git repository. So yeah, let's go ahead and hit enter. And while this is installing, let's also go ahead and talk about the database. So I do have the database already configured, and in this case, we'll be using the MySQL. So let's choose that, and let's go ahead and look into our browser. So here what I have done is I have defined this Livewire Alpine Data Tables database, and to manage the database we'll be making use of phpMyAdmin, and later I might use a dedicated database client. For now I'm just using this, and yeah, I think our project is installed successfully. So now let's navigate to the Livewire Alpine Data Tables project and open this in our code editor. And yeah, let's go ahead and set things up. So the database name here is going to be Livewire Alpine Data Tables, and let's also go ahead and install Laravel Livewire because we will be making use of Livewire a lot in this project. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Composer require Livewire. Let's hit enter. And yeah, this was just a quick video about setting up our project. In the next part, we'll be looking at defining the models and migrations. So yeah, we'll start by defining the class, section, and students models and migrations, and later we'll define the seeders necessary for these models and migrations. And yeah, in the upcoming videos, we'll start by defining the data, work with the forms, and other stuff. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's go ahead and define the models and migrations for our project. But before doing that, I want to give you an overview about the database structure. And yeah, the idea behind showing you the database structure is to make you properly understand the data flow in our project. And once we understand the logic and the structure of our system, then building out features is really easy because we now know how the project or the system works. So here in this project, we'll be building out a mini student management system in case I have not mentioned that earlier. And in that project, we'll be defining three models. One is the classes model, the sections model, and the students model. So I think this diagram is self-explanatory, but still I'll explain to you everything. So we have the student model, and each student belongs to a certain class and a certain section. And each student has a property of name and email. You can go ahead and add in more properties, but I want to keep this simple, and these are enough for our case. And for the classes, we have ID and name. And the reason for naming this as classes is because class is a reserved word in most of the languages. And since we are dealing with PHP in this case, so in PHP as well, class is a reserved word, so we can't really use that. So that's the reason we have defined this as classes. And we also have this sections table, which has the ID, class ID, and name. So each section belongs to a certain class. So yeah, this is a really simple database structure, but still I wanted to give you an overview about it. And now let's go ahead and define each of these models and also define the migrations for each of these models. So yeah, let's open up our editor, and we'll start by defining the classes model because this is kind of a parent model and these depend on this classes table. So yeah, we'll gradually define these one by one, starting with classes and then sections and then the student. So yeah, let's define the classes model, artisan make model classes. Let's also go ahead and define the migration file, and let's navigate to these files. And here we'll only keep the name property of the class. So yeah, let's go ahead and define that table string name, and we don't need anything else for this model. So that's done. And let's also go ahead and define the fillable property here. So protected fillable name. Let's go ahead and define the sections model as well. So PHP artisan make model section. Let's hit enter and let's navigate to these files. Let's go ahead and define the migration file for this. So this is gonna store the data of class ID as well, since this is gonna belong to a certain class. And yeah, as usual, this is gonna store the name of the section. And yeah, we don't need anything else for this model as well. Let's also go ahead and work on the fillable property. And yeah, let's go ahead and pass that in, protected fillable class ID and name. Let's also go ahead and work on the student model while we are here. So yeah, let's define that as well. PHP artisan make model student, and we also want to define the migration file. So I'll pass in -m as a parameter, and yeah, let's navigate to these files and let's go ahead and define the migrations. So section ID, and this is also going to store the class ID, and this is also going to have the name and the email. And yeah, what I want to do here is I want to define these foreign keys at the top. So I'll just shift them one level up, and now we can define the name, the email, and I think we are done in here. We don't need anything else. In this case, we have the ID, the class ID and section ID, and the name and email. Okay, that looks good. And these are constrained. And I doubt that sometimes when we pass in class ID like this, in case Laravel won't be able to assume the plural form of this. So it's a good idea to pass in the table name in cases like these where there's a bit of a confusing name for the table name. So in that case, we can pass in the value of that table. And for the section, since this is section ID and we are following the convention, so yeah, Laravel is gonna assume that we have a table called sections. So yeah, we don't have to pass that. And now let's go ahead and run the migration. So I'll just run php artisan migrate. In this case, PAM means php artisan migrate. Let's hit enter and we have an error in here. Okay, I need to pass in the database password. In this case, I have not passed any, so I'll just pass that in. And let's go ahead and run that command again. And now we have successfully migrated all the files. So yeah, this looks good. And in the next part, we'll work on defining the seeders for our models. So yeah, that's also going to be an interesting one, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's go ahead and define the factories and seeders for our models that we defined in the previous video. And the reason for doing this is whenever we start working with our data table and when we display the data, then I want something to be stored in the database while we are trying to display something. So yeah, it makes our data table development series a bit more easier. And yeah, let's go ahead and define the seeders and factories for our models. So yeah, let's start with the factories first. And since we have 3 models, we are going to define factories for each of these models. So yeah, let's start with the classes factory. Artisan make factory, classes factory. Let's go ahead and define that. And let's also define the section factory. And finally, let's define the student factory. Let's hit enter. Let's open each of these files one by one, and let's work on these. So for the classes factory and section factory, we don't have to pass any definitions because we'll be passing them manually from the seeder itself. So yeah, we don't need to pass anything in this case, but we do need to pass something in our student factory because we have name and email as the columns in this student model. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass those in, and instead of typing that from scratch, I'll just paste that in. So for the name, we'll use the faker library and pass in the name, and for the email, we'll pass in the safe email. So yeah, that's done. And let's now go ahead and define a seeder called classes seeder, and from that seeder, we will be seeding other models data as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and define that. And the name here is going to be classes seeder. So PHP artisan make seeder classes seeder. Let's hit enter. Let's open that file. And here, instead of typing everything from scratch, what I will do is I'll just go ahead and paste the code and then explain to you what that code does. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so let me just go ahead and pull that in. I'll just paste that code in here, and yeah, I'll explain to you what this code does. But first, let's start by importing all of these classes. So let's import the classes model. Let's import the section model. Let's also go ahead and import this sequence class provided by Laravel. And here we also need the student model, and everything else looks good. Okay, so we'll start with the classes factory and we'll define 10 classes. And for each of the sequence, that is for each of the loop, what we will do is we'll pass in the name as class with a space, and then to the sequence we are adding in 1. So since this is like a for each loop, it's going to start with 0. So the first instance is going to be 0 plus 1. So the final name is going to be class 1 for the first sequence, and so on for the 10 sequences that we have defined here. And for each of this class, we are defining this has relationship. And yeah, we need to define the relationship in our respective models. So each class has a section, multiple sections actually. And in this case, we are defining 2 sections for each class. As you can see, we are passing in 2. And in that sequence, what we are doing is we are passing in this state, and in that state we are passing in again this sequence, which is gonna pass in these values one by one. So since we are defining two sections, so for the first section, this is going to use this name, and for the second iteration, that is whenever it tries to create the second section, it's going to use this name. And yeah, since we are using the relationship, then for each of the class, it's going to define two sections. And again, for each section, this is going to define 5 students. And again, we are passing in the state, which is going to grab the attributes and the respective section that we are defining this data for, and it's going to be injected here. And in that case, what's going to happen is it's going to pass in this class ID, which is going to be the current section's class ID. And yeah, this is going to finally build out our student related data, and finally call this create method, which is going to create all of the data. So yeah, this looks good. Let's now go ahead and pass this in our database seeder. Let's go ahead and look into that database seeder, and we need to call this classes seeder. So let's go ahead and call that, and we can pass in multiple classes using an array. Let's go ahead and pass in the classes seeder class, which is gonna seed the data for all of our models, like the class, the section, and the student. So yeah, let's go ahead and save the classes seeder, and let's go ahead and give this a try now. So I'll just run artisan migrate fresh and also call the seed method along the way. So this is gonna drop all the tables and seed the data. So let's go ahead and hit enter. Okay, we have some errors, maybe. Okay, let's go ahead and look into it. So call to undefined method, classes section. Yeah, we have not defined the relationship yet. So let's go ahead and do that on all of the models. Let's start with the classes model and define the section relationship in here. So each class is going to have multiple sections. So this has many section class. Let's navigate to our section model and define the class relationship in here. And this belongs to a certain class. And what else do we need? Okay, this belongs to a certain class, and the relationship here is gonna be class ID. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass that in. And okay, let's also go ahead and define the relationship for the student. So each section can have many students. So yeah, let's go ahead and define that relationship. Students, this has many student class. And let's also go ahead and define the same in our student model. So the first one is going to be class. A student belongs to a certain class. And let's also define the same for the section. Okay, let's save that. And now our seeder should work. So let's go ahead and give this a try one more time. Artisan migrate fresh dash dash seed to seed the data, and we still have an error. Okay, unknown column classes ID in field list connection MySQL insert into sections. So yeah, we need to go ahead and pass that class ID column as well. In our classes model, we have passed in has many sections, but the foreign key that this connects to is actually class ID. So yeah, we need to pass that in because we are referencing this relationship from the classes model, and by default Laravel is going to assume that since this is a classes model, then the foreign key is going to be classes underscore ID, which is not the case for our project. So yeah, we need to pass that in here. In our case, we have a foreign key of class ID. So here we need to pass that in. Let's save that, and let's now go ahead and give this a try. So I'll just try to run that artisan migrate fresh dash dash seed command again. And now our database seeder executed successfully. Let's go ahead and give this a try in our database client. So I'll just open the phpMyAdmin and reload. Okay, we have this Livewire Alpine data tables database, and let's go ahead and look into our students table. The class ID is 1, section ID is 1, name and email looks good. Let's go ahead and look into our classes table, and okay, this looks good. And also on our sections, we have section A and B for each of these classes. So yeah, this looks good. Now our database seeder is also set up, and in the next part, we'll be looking at displaying the students related data. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, so in the previous video, we worked on defining the seeders and factories for our models, and we seeded some data into our database. And since we now have some data, we can now go ahead and display them. And yeah, in this video, we'll work on that. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a new Livewire component, and I'm gonna name that component as list students. And let me switch over to another terminal since we'll be running the npm run dev command in here. Let me go ahead and run that in the background, and let's go ahead and define a new Livewire component, and I'm going to name that component as list students. Let's hit enter, and let's now navigate to these files. And yeah, let's start with this list students blade file, and I'm gonna go ahead and paste the design for our table. I'm not gonna type it from scratch because we are using Tailwind and that will take a lot of time. So I'll just go ahead and paste the code. And okay, let me remove this div first and paste that here. And now as you can see, we have a simple HTML file with some Tailwind styling applied. Okay, that looks good. We don't have any other Livewire or anything else going on in here. This is just plain HTML with Tailwind styling, and I will be looking into the design of this as well. But first, let's go ahead and look into our web.php. And here what I want to do is I only want to let the authenticated users access our table. So what we can do is in our auth middleware group, we can go ahead and define a new route, and we will be using the full page component functionality provided by Livewire. So yeah, we won't be defining any intermediate routes and controllers. We will be using full page Livewire components. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a new route, and the route here is going to be students. Let's go ahead and pass that list students Livewire components, and let's also provide the name of this route. In this case, it's students.index. Let's save that, and we might get an error about the layout file not found by Livewire, and I think we have looked into this earlier as well, so I will go ahead and fix that if we face that error. Okay, so let's navigate to the students route. I'll just go ahead and type in students in here, and okay, we get this error that Livewire page component layout view not found, components.layouts.app. So by default, Livewire assumes that we have a layout file inside this components.layouts.app directory, but in our case we don't have that, but instead we have it inside views. Inside layouts we have this app.blade.php, and what we can do is there are multiple ways to fix this, and one of the quick ways is to pass in component based layouts. So what we can do here is we can instruct Livewire to use a specific layout for this specific component, and yeah, that's also available in the documentation. And let me go ahead and pull that in. I'll just paste in the documentation link. And yeah, let's go ahead and look into this. So we have this layout file section, and we can even provide a global layout configuration in our livewire.php configuration file, we can pass in the directory of our layout that we want to use in all of the pages. We can do that as well, but for now I just want to show you this simple handy feature provided by Livewire, which is component based layouts. And here we can specify the layout that this component is going to use by passing in this layout attribute, and we can pass in the directory of our layout. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that in our render method. Above the render method, let's go ahead and pass that in. Let's pull this layout file, and in our case we have our layouts inside views layouts.app. So yeah, this looks good. Layouts.app is the correct directory. Let's go ahead and now give this a refresh. I'll just open up our project, and now as you can see we have our table rendered. So yeah, this is the simple design, and let's now go ahead and render the data from our database. And since we want to display a list of students from the database, so what we can do here is we can pass that data directly in here, students. Let's go ahead and pull that from the database by passing in student model, and we'll use this all method to grab all the records from the database. Let's go ahead and import this student model from app models student, and now we can go ahead and loop over the student data. So here we have these headings, and okay, let's go ahead and loop over this tr. So I'll just cut this block of code and pass in for each students as student. Let's paste that tr, and let's go ahead and display the data now. So this is gonna be student ID, and I'm using GitHub Copilot to generate some repetitive code. And if you are familiar with Laravel, then this is basic stuff. So yeah, I'm not gonna type everything from scratch, but still I'll explain to you what every block of code does. And yeah, this is gonna display the student ID. We want to display the student name. Let's also go ahead and display the student email, and we want to display the class name. And since we have set the relationship already, so yeah, this should work as well. Okay, this should be student class name, and let's also go ahead and display the section name. And edit and delete buttons, will be working on these later, but for now I just want to display the data. Let's go ahead and reload. Okay, we have an error somewhere. Student ID, student name, student email. Okay, this should be stu, and okay, we have all the data now. And while we are here, let's also go ahead and implement pagination. And implementing pagination in Livewire is really easy. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And to implement it, we just need to use a trait called use with pagination. We just need to provide that, and Livewire is going to implement pagination for us. So yeah, let's go ahead and reload. And I think we are displaying all the records from the database. So what we can do here is we can just pass in this paginate method, which is gonna return the pagination related data as well along with the records, and that is gonna be used by Livewire under the hood to display the pagination links. Okay, let's save that. And okay, we don't have the links because we need to go ahead and render them. So on our list students, let's also go ahead and render the pagination links, and I'm gonna do that here. So what we can do is we can render the students links in here. Let's save that and reload. Okay, that looks a bit off. So what I will do, since this is going outside this table, so I'll just shift this one div above and reload. Okay, that looks good now. We just need to add in some margin on top. So I'll just wrap this on a div and apply some margins. Okay, class margin top of 5. Let's see how this looks like. Okay, that looks good. So now pagination is working fine. And yeah, this was a quick video about displaying the data in a Livewire component from the database. And in the next part, we'll be looking at creating records. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's now go ahead and work on creating the student records. And this is also pretty simple. The only thing that we need to do here is define a new Livewire component, define the form where the user can enter the data, run some validations, and store the data into the database. That's the whole flow. So yeah, let's go ahead and work on that. So yeah, let's open up our Visual Studio Code, and let me go ahead and get rid of these comments because yeah, we don't need those. And yeah, let's go ahead and define a new route. So I'll just copy this, and the route here is going to be students create. This is going to go to the create student class. The name is going to be students dot create, and we can't save this just yet because this create student class doesn't exist yet, and Laravel will throw an error that this class doesn't exist. So yeah, before saving that, let's go ahead and define a new Livewire component called list student, and this should be create student because we are creating a single student in that component. So yeah, the name also matters. So yeah, let's define this create student Livewire component. Let's hit enter and let's navigate to these. And yeah, I'll start with the design first. I'll just go ahead and paste the design, and then we will work on other stuff. Okay, so let me just go ahead and paste the design for this. And just like we did in the previous video, this is also a simple HTML code with the tailwind styling applied. And yeah, we'll look into the design, how it looks like, and then we'll work on the features. So yeah, we have this create student Livewire component, and we have defined the route for this. Let's go ahead and import the create student class, and let's save that. And let's now go ahead and hook this up in our index.blade. We do have this link called add student, which does not go anywhere right now. So let's go ahead and add that route in here. So the route is going to go to students.create, and here we can get rid of this. That doesn't matter. And when the user clicks on it, then we will navigate to the students create page. Okay, let's go ahead and reload, and let's click on add student. Okay, again, we are getting this Livewire page component layout view not found. So what we can do here is let's go ahead and publish the livewire.php config file, and then we will apply that layout file for all of our components. So yeah, let's do that. And I want to publish the config file for Laravel, and yeah, let's go ahead and look into the commands that we have. Okay, the vendor publish is going to be used to publish the assets for vendor packages. So yeah, let's go ahead and run that in artisan vendor publish, and I want to publish the Livewire config. And yeah, since we are using the Laravel prompts package, so it provides us a really good interface to search through the tags and then filter out our files. So in this case, I want to publish the Livewire config, so I'll choose that, and this is going to publish the Livewire PHP config file. Let's navigate to that, and we don't need to change any of these stuff, but the layout file is from the layouts.app. And yeah, let's now go ahead and give this a try. This should work. Okay, it's still not working. So the layout, okay, I think this is, I made the change on the vendor file, so I'll just undo that, and let's go ahead and make the necessary change in the correct folder. So the layout file is gonna be from the layouts.app directory. Let's go ahead and reload, and yeah, this should now work. And we can now go ahead and undo the change that we did here for the list students Livewire component. So yeah, let's save that, and this should work as usual. Okay, so let's go ahead and work on this create student Livewire component. Let's go ahead and define these fields and work on this. Okay, so on our create student Livewire component, let's go ahead and define a few public properties, because we will be storing the state of our form in these properties, and these will also be used to perform some validations, and finally we'll create the data. So yeah, let's start by defining the name of the student. And yeah, we do have name, we have the email, we have class and the section. And I also want to mention you one more thing, that is to name your variables as they are in the database columns, because it makes working with these flows a bit more easy. You don't have to think about the column name of your database, and yeah, everything is more natural when you have the same names. So yeah, we have an email, we have class ID that we want to store, and we also have section ID. Okay, so by default these are all going to be null, and I will be managing the state of these in these public properties. And since they are public, we don't have to pass them in our blade file. They'll be automatically passed to the view. So yeah, let's save that, and let's now go ahead and wire model these in our create student blade file. So here we have the form for the name, input type text, ID is name, we have the class. Let's go ahead and pass in the wire model equal to name. Let's copy that. And for the email, this is gonna be wire model email. And yeah, we need to implement dependent dropdown functionality for this class and section, which we will be doing in the next video. But yeah, we need to go ahead and model this properly. So wire model is gonna be class ID, and let's also go ahead and do the same for our section, wire model section ID. Okay, so what happens when we click on submit? So we have a form which does not go anywhere right now, and we don't need these actions and methods when working with Livewire. We just need to pass in wire submit, and where do you want to go when we click on the submit button. Since we want to create the student's data, so what we can do is we can define this method called add student, and we have the button that says submit somewhere in here. Okay, so this cancel will navigate us to the index page, so let's define that as well. Route students dot index, and the save button is a type of submit, so yeah, make sure to pass that in. And for the default buttons, you should also pass button type as button, because by default HTML is going to assume that if the button is not a type of button, then it's going to assume that it is a type of submit. So even if you click on a normal button, it's going to submit that form. So yeah, you should keep that in mind. And yeah, I think this flow looks good. Let's go ahead and define this add student method in our create student Livewire component, and I'm going to do that in here. Add student, let's go ahead and dd something in here, and let's go ahead and give this a try. So I'll type something and some dummy data, click on save. Okay, our add to do method is being called, so yeah, that looks good. And we can even run some validations in here. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So yeah, let's first open up our documentation, because I want to show you the documentation and then work on the features. So we have a section called forms, and I think, okay, we have this validation section. So let's go ahead and work on that. And we can use the attributes feature in Laravel to perform validations. We don't have to do this conventional validations anymore. And yeah, we have this validate attributes, which can be applied to these individual properties. So yeah, I'll just copy this block of code and I'll define these in separate lines. To perform these validations, they need to be on separate statements. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and define these as a separate property. And yeah, let's go ahead and define these. So public email, public name, and let me go ahead and pass these by using multi-cursors. And for the name, we need a validation of required, and yeah, we can go ahead and pass in this minimum of 3, but in this case I'm not gonna do that. I just want to show you how to work with validations for now. And for the email, this should be required, and email, you can even pass in this unique property. And for the student's email, this should be unique. That looks good. Validation for class ID is required, and for the section ID as well, it's going to be required. Okay, let's save that. And we have not displayed the validation messages on the front end yet. So yeah, even if we go ahead and work on our form, this is not going to work properly because the validation is going to kick in. But to do that, we also need to go ahead and call the this validate method. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So when we call this validate method, only then it's going to go ahead and read these properties and then trigger the validation checks. So yeah, let's save that and let's click on save button. Then as you can see, the DD is not being called. So yeah, the validation is being triggered. And yeah, let's also go ahead and display the validation messages here, because what's the point of not displaying them? If we have implemented it, we need to show the user the relevant validation messages. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that in our create student.blade. Okay, in here, let's say show the validation messages. In case of error for name, we will pass in a margin top of 1, text SM, text red 500, and display the message. Okay, that looks good. Let's end the error, and we can even pass in some validation messages in here. In case of error for the name, what can we do? Okay, so when there's an error for this specific name, let's go ahead and pass in some validation classes to this. And instead of typing that from scratch, I'll just go ahead and paste that in. And here we can get rid of this show validation message comment. And I'll just go ahead and copy this block of code. But first, let's go ahead and look into it, how this looks like, and then we will implement this on other fields as well. So let's reload, click on save, and okay, this looks a bit better now. Okay, let's go ahead and copy that and implement that on other fields as well. I'll just go ahead and paste that for the email, for the class, and for the section. Let's also go ahead and copy this error block of code and paste that here. Okay, and for the class as well, let's go ahead and paste that below the select field and do the same for our section as well. Okay, let's save that and let's go ahead and give this a refresh. When there's a validation error, then we see this validation message now. Okay, the name field is required. Okay, we need to go ahead and update that. Instead of name, this is going to be section ID. Let's see what name do we have in here. Okay, we have section ID wire modeled to section ID. This is class ID, and okay, we also need to update that. Okay, this is class ID and this is section ID. Okay, let's also go ahead and update that for the email. We are on the email field. Let's go ahead and update both of these at once, email, and yeah, this looks good. Let's go ahead and reload and click on save. The email field is required. Class ID, section ID. Okay, that looks good. And now on our create student, we just need to go ahead and create the record, but there's one issue in here. That is, we still need to implement this dependent dropdown. But first, let's go ahead and display the class related data. So when we render this create student, let's go ahead and pass in the classes related data in here. So classes, let's grab all the classes and let me type that properly. And let's go ahead and import the model. And now we can go ahead and loop over each of the classes and display them in our select dropdown. So instead of this, let's go ahead and loop over the classes for each classes as class. Let's shift this inside the for each loop, and the value here is gonna be class ID, and let's go ahead and display the class name. Okay, let's go ahead and define variable classes. I probably made a typo. For each classes as class. Where is that coming from? Okay, triple S, this should be double S, and now we have a drop down of classes that is coming directly from the database. Okay, so we need to work on this dependent drop down where when we select a certain class, then we want to populate the sections based on the class that is selected. So yeah, I think this video is getting a bit lengthy, so we'll work on that in the next video. Okay, it's time to implement the dependent drop-down feature for this class and section, where when we select a certain class, then based on the class selected, we want to populate the sections related data. And talking about the logic for this, I think I have talked about this in one of the earlier videos where we implemented the lifecycle hooks of Livewire. And in that video, we talked about a feature where we could run a certain block of code when a certain property was updated. So here we'll be looking into the lifecycle hook of Livewire and making use of that feature to grab the sections related data when a certain class or a certain property changes. So yeah, let's go ahead and work on that. And first, let's go ahead and define a sections variable, which is initially going to be an empty array. And when the property updates, then we will populate that variable by grabbing the data from the database. Okay, so let's define a sections variable, which is initially going to be an empty array. And I'll just define that in here, public sections. And this should be an empty array initially, because when we try to loop over these data in our blade file, then if it is not an iterable, that is, if we can't iterate over that variable, then Laravel is going to throw an error that we are trying to loop over a null or a non-iterable variable. So yeah, make sure to define that as a empty array, or it can be any other value, but it should be iterable. So yeah, let's save that, and let's now go ahead and loop over the sections data in our select field of section. So initially we have this data, but what we want to do here is we want to loop over the sections variable that we just defined for each sections as section, and here we can loop over this data. The value here is going to be section ID, since this is the value that we want to store in the database. And the label here is going to be section name. So let's pass that in. And for now, we don't have any data. When the Livewire component just renders, initially the sections variable is going to be an empty array, and this is not going to render anything. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. Let's see what our output looks like. Currently, we don't have any sections selected because the Livewire component just rendered, and initially the array is an empty array. So yeah, we don't see any data in here. But when a user selects any class, then we can run a certain block of code using the Livewire's Lifecycle hook. And when this class property changes, then we will run that code and populate the sections variable. So yeah, let's go ahead and work on that. So we have this class ID variable, which we will be watching. If you have worked with views, then we would implement a watcher that would watch for a change in a certain variable. And this is kind of a similar concept in Livewire. So yeah, let's go ahead and define that method called updated. Okay, let me spell that correctly. Updated class ID. And we have talked about this earlier as well. Whenever this class ID property is updated, then this method will be called. And along with that, we also get the value it was updated to. And to test this out, let's go ahead and dd the value of this. And let's go ahead and give this a try now. So whenever this value of the class changes, then Livewire is going to run through all of these lifecycle hooks. And since we have defined this lifecycle hook in our component, then this is going to be executed. So yeah, let's go ahead and select class 1. And there's one more issue that we need to address, that is in Livewire version 3 and later. By default, all the wire model properties are deferred. So to see this in action, to make things live, we need to pass in the live modifier to our model. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that as well. By default, all the properties are deferred to improve the performance and also to prevent making excessive network requests to the backend. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass that live modifier to our wire model. Yeah, we need to pass this live modifier. And now if we go ahead and reload, and if I click on class 2, then as you can see, the ID of the class is being dumped. So yeah, now we can use that to grab the sections related data. And what we can do is we can just assign our sections variable that we have defined in here. And we can grab all the sections where the class ID is the value that we receive as a parameter. And okay, we also need to call get in here. That would actually execute the query and return us a collection. So yeah, let's also import the section model. And now let's go ahead and give this a try. So currently we don't have any sections. If I go ahead and select class 1, then as you can see, we have section A and B that belongs to this specific class. And to test this out, we can even go ahead and pass in the class related data of the section. Just to test this out, let's go ahead and pass in the section class name. And let's reload once. If I select class 1, then as you can see, section A and B of class 1 are being rendered here. So yeah, this flow looks good. Let's now go ahead and finalize our student creation flow. So once we click on submit, we go to this add student method. We validate the request, and then we can go ahead and create the student. So finally, we will create the student record, student create, we can pass these records in this array. So let's go ahead and pass in the name. We already have the name in our component, so we can pass that in. And we also have email, class ID, and section ID. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. This email, and I'll just copy these and update these at once. So class ID and section ID. Okay, let's save that. And once we create the data, we can redirect back to the index page. Return redirect to the students.index. Okay, let's save that and let's give this a try. Let's go ahead and create a new student. Just pass in the data as new student. Email is going to be submail@gmail.com. Class 1, section A. Click on save. Okay, allow name to fillable property. Yeah, we haven't done that. So let's go to our student model and define the fillable property. Protected fillable equals an array of data with name, email, class ID, and section ID. Okay, let's go ahead and give this a try one more time. Some name, email is submail@gmail.com, class 1 and section A. Click on save, and now we are redirected to the students index page. And let's go ahead and look into the 7th page. And as you can see, we have this record displayed here. So yeah, this flow looks good. And in the next part, we'll be working on this edit flow. So yeah, that's also going to be an interesting one, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's now go ahead and work on the student update flow. And most of the stuff is going to be almost similar to the create flow with a few changes here and there. And before working on the feature itself, I also want to talk about the flow that we'll be implementing throughout this video. So we'll start by defining the component, and then we will register the route for that component. That is the student's edit route. And then we will copy most of the stuff from the create flow. That is the form and the properties and methods of the create student component, since they are all the same. And the only difference in this flow is that the form is going to be filled with the data, and the user is going to update the necessary stuff that they want to update for the record that is being edited. So let's go ahead and define the route for this. And yeah, I have opened the Visual Studio Code. So yeah, what I am going to do here is I'll just copy this student's create route and then make the necessary changes. And since this is going to be the edit route, so in this case, we are going to pass in the ID of the record that is being edited. And the route here is going to be students ID and then the edit route. The component that this is going to return is the edit student component, and the name is going to be students.edit. So let's go ahead and define the Livewire component now. Artisan Livewire make edit student. And while we are here, I also want to explain to you a few more stuff about the code organization. That is the component organization. And to properly organize the components, what we can do is, since I am only dealing with one CRUD in this case, so that's the reason I'm defining the name as edit student, list student, or create student. But in a real world project, there are multiple models and we need to implement multiple CRUDs. So what we can do in that case is we can do something like student, and then in that student namespace, we can go ahead and define other components like index or create or edit. Yeah, you get the idea. So that would make our folder structure a bit more flexible, and our project would also be a bit more maintainable for the future. So yeah, that's one of the ways to organize our project. So yeah, let's go ahead and define this edit student Livewire component, and the component has been created, I'll just navigate to this edit student blade and copy most of the stuff from our create student.blade file. And you might see a few things around my project that we have not covered yet. And the reason for that is I had to re-record this lecture because my voice got a bit messed up in the previous one. So yeah, there are a few things that you might see that we have not covered yet, but we will be doing that in the future, so don't worry about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy this create student.blade, and I'll just go ahead and paste that here, and let's go ahead and make the necessary changes. So the label here is going to be use this form to update students details. So yeah, let's go ahead and update that. Doesn't really matter, but still details do matter. And wire modeling and other stuff are going to be same. And okay, let's go ahead and look into it. So we have this email address wire modeled to the email, and we have the class ID wire modeled to this class ID. And yeah, we also have this live modifier passed in because we want to implement the dependent dropdown functionality in the edit page as well. And we are looping over the classes data, and we also have the section field modeled to this section ID, and we are looping over the sections related data, which is coming from the database. And okay, in the cancel link, we have the students.index route. And finally, we have the button type of submit, which says save. But since this is an edit page, so I want to pass in the update label, and everything else looks good. Okay, so let's go ahead and work on the edit student Livewire component. And okay, let's also save the route file, and we have defined the edit student Livewire component, so we can go ahead and import that. That is imported, and let's save that route file, and let's go ahead and work on the edit student Livewire component. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and copy most of the stuff from here. Okay, I'll just copy these, and let's navigate to the edit student Livewire component, and I'll just go ahead and paste those here. And we are also passing in the classes related data. So I'll just copy this block of code and paste that in here because we have to pass in the classes related data as well. And yeah, let's go ahead and import these classes now, the validate class, and let's also import the student model because I will need that. And let's import the section model and the classes model. Okay, so let's go ahead and make the necessary changes here. So we have this validation, and I also want to implement additional validation for the update method about the uniqueness of the student's email. We need to pass in additional parameter to this, that is the current student ID. And since we are passing in like a string in here, PHP won't allow passing dynamic values in here. So yeah, we'll look into this, and everything else looks good. We are validating the section ID. We have an initial empty array for the sections property, and we have the class ID. And instead of add student, this is gonna be update. And since this is an edit student component, we don't even have to pass in the student value in here because edit students update method actually means that we are updating the student's data, and we are validating the request, and then we are creating the student, but we are on the edit student component. So instead of creating a new record, we'll be updating the existing record. But the question here is, how do we get the record so that we can update the record that is currently being edited? And the answer for that is, since we are passing the student's ID in our route, that is this route, this ID that we are passing in from this route can be accessed in our Livewire component. And just like we have root model binding in Laravel, Livewire also makes use of that, and we can use that feature to grab the student's data. And to access the record, what we can do here is we can just go ahead and define a public property, public students student. And since we are passing in the student ID in here, Livewire is going to grab the student model by that specific ID and then assign that model to this public property. So yeah, that all happens under the hood, and we don't have to go ahead and query the database for that specific ID. And now, since we have this student record, we can go ahead and reference that in here. So we can do that by passing in this student. And since we are updating the record, we can pass in update, and we want to update the name, email, class ID, and section ID. And once that is done, we can just redirect to the index page. And we still need this updated class ID lifecycle hook, which is going to assign the sections based on the value that we get from here. And yeah, the render method also looks good. We are passing in the classes related data, but we still have some issues in here about the sections property, because this is going to be an empty array and we need a way to populate this sections array. And we can do that on our mount method. But yeah, let's go ahead and look into this, and we'll identify the issue and then we will work on the fix. So yeah, let's save that, and let's now go ahead and look into the flow. And yeah, we also need to update our link, that is this edit link, which we have not done yet. So let's go ahead and work on that. On our list students played, we have the edit link. So let's go ahead and pass in the route for this. Route is gonna be students.edit. And since we have the current iteration of the student record, we can pass that in. So let's go ahead and pass the student ID to this. And now if we go ahead and reload, if I go ahead and click on the edit link, then we will be redirected to the students and then ID and the edit page. But we don't have any data currently because we are not filling that by grabbing it from the database. So yeah, we need to go ahead and work on that. But we still have the classes related data, which we have passed it from our component that is passed from here, but it is not currently selected, and the sections is also not working. So yeah, for filling up the properties from the database, we can make use of the mount lifecycle hook. So let's go ahead and define the method called mount, and we can basically assign properties in this lifecycle hook. So since we have the student model that we grab from the root model binding, we can fill out our properties, and Livewire provides this handy fill method that we can use to fill the properties from the model that is currently being edited. And here what we can do is we can just pass in the student record and pass in the columns that we want to update. So in this case, we want to update the name, the email, the class ID, and the section ID. Okay, so let's save this and let's go ahead and reload. And now as you can see, the name, the email address, and class is being populated, because on our mount method, we are filling our properties by grabbing the current record, and then from that record, we are grabbing the name, email, class ID, and section ID. But there's one more issue in here, that is the sections dropdown doesn't have any value because it is an empty array initially, and we need to go ahead and populate this as well. And we can do that by assigning this sections variable, and we can grab this section where the class ID is the student class ID. And remember that we still have the student model here. So we can grab the class ID and any other properties that we want to grab from this specific model. So yeah, now this should work. Let's save that and let's go ahead and reload. Okay. Property type not supported in Livewire for property. Okay, I think we made a mistake here. That is, we did not call the get method in here. So it did not return a collection, but instead a query. So that could be a reason for that error. So let's go ahead and reload. And yeah, now we have the sections data that is being grabbed from the database. And yeah, everything is working fine. So let's go ahead and look into the update flow. So here, what I want to do is I want to pass in the ID of the record that is currently being edited to this unique validation, because we want to ignore the record that is currently being edited. But there are a few limitations while implementing validation in this way. We can pass in the string type of validations using this method, but if you want to pass in something dynamic, then because of the limitations of PHP, we can't really do that in here. So instead of that, what we can do is, okay, let's go ahead and copy this, and I'll just remove this validation stuff for this email, and instead I will go ahead and do that in here. So for the email, what we can do is we can pass in the validation in this validate method, and the rules for this is going to be required email unique for the students table. The column is unique, and since we want to ignore the record that is currently being edited, we can go ahead and pass in the ID of the record that is being currently edited. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass that in, and now the validation should work fine. So let's go ahead and look into the flow of our edit student feature. So I'll just go ahead and reload, and let's go ahead and update the student data. The current ID is 2, and this is the record that we want to edit. So let's go ahead and assign the student class 1 and section A. Click on update. Okay, unable to call component method, public method as student. Okay, we need to go ahead and update this add student method. Instead of that, it's going to be update. And okay, I think it's just update. Yep. Let's go ahead and pass that in. Let's remove this student value, and let's go ahead and give this a try. Okay, let's reload, and I'll assign this student the class 1 and section A. Click on update, and now we are redirected to the index page with the record being updated. So yeah, that looks good. And yeah, we have finally implemented the listing of the records and creation and editing of the record. And in the next part, we'll be looking at using form objects to manage our form related stuff. So yeah, form objects are basically a new addition to the Livewire version 3, and they basically help us to isolate the form related stuff to a dedicated form object, and we will be looking into that in the next video. Okay, it's time to work with form objects in Livewire, and they are a new addition to Livewire from version 3, and they make dealing with forms a bit more easy by letting us shift the form related operations into a dedicated form object. And yeah, in this video we'll be looking at how we can shift the form related stuff of this create student component into a dedicated form object, and we'll be looking at that. And in the next part, we'll be looking at doing the same for our update student Livewire component. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff covered in the documentation as well, and you can go ahead and look into the docs that is on the form section. There's a dedicated section about form objects. And okay, where is that? Extracting a form object. So yeah, you can go ahead and look into it. There's the documentation about how we can define a form object, and we can run the validations, we can define the properties, and we can even shift the creation flow and the methods to create a new record into the form object. And here there's also the scenario about the editing flow covered, so you can go ahead and look into that as well. And yeah, let's go ahead and actually work on this. So let's start by defining a dedicated form object that is gonna handle the creation of this student related record. And the way to define a new form object is by calling the Livewire form, and we can pass in the name of the form. In this case, I'm gonna name this as create form. And to further specify the model for this, what we can do is we can just pass in the create student form, Let's go ahead and hit enter, and let's navigate to this specific form object. And now what we can do is we can basically shift the properties and methods that we have in our main Livewire component to our dedicated form object. And what this also does is it helps us maintain our project in the long run, because we now have a dedicated file that is responsible for creating or editing the record. And this also helps keep our Livewire components more clean. So yeah, let's go ahead and copy these properties, and I'll just go ahead and cut them and paste that in the form object, the create student form object. And I'm not going to shift this class ID from this component because we are watching for this property. So yeah, we'll be keeping that, and everything else can be shifted. So let's also remove this section ID from here, and we can also remove this sections array. Let's remove those, and let's paste those here. And what we can also do is for the add student logic, the validation part and the create student part can be shifted to a dedicated method in our form object itself. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a new method called store student, which is basically responsible for storing the student into the database. And let's paste that here. Let's import the student model, and we don't have the class ID yet, but we will be receiving that as a parameter. So yeah, let's go ahead and receive that class ID and reference that in here. And yeah, now this should work. And in our create student, what we can do is we can go ahead and define that create student form object, and let's name that as form. We don't have any of the form in here, so yeah, naming that as a form is totally fine. And when the user clicks on the add student method, then we can reference our form object with this form, and whatever properties and methods are defined in that form can now be accessed from here. So we do have this store student method, and this expects the class ID. So what we can do is, since we have the class ID defined in this component itself, so we can go ahead and reference that as this class ID. Okay, let's save that, and our Livewire component now looks a lot cleaner since we have shifted most of our creation logic into this dedicated form object, and we have only kept the stuff that we actually need. That is the class ID in this case. And when the class ID is updated, then we'll just go ahead and assign the sections variable by grabbing the data from the database. And okay, I think we should keep this sections property in this component itself because we are referencing that in here. And whenever the class ID is updated, then we need to execute this method. But yeah, there are a lot of ways to do this. One of the ways that we can do is we can call a method from here and define a new setter method in our form object. So yeah, let's go ahead and look into that approach as well. Let's define a new method, and this is going to set the sections property that is going to be defined in this form object. And I think, yeah, we have done that. And whenever we call this method, then we'll just go ahead and implement this functionality that we have in here and shift this logic to that specific method. So I'll just remove this block of code and paste that here. And since we have this sections property defined in this object, so we can receive the class ID here, and we can grab the section related data where the class ID is the received class ID, and we will just get the data. And now on our create student component, we can just call this form set sections, and we can pass in the value. Okay, this looks good. Let's now go ahead and remove these unwanted imports, and I'll just sort the imports as well. And let's go ahead and give this a try now. Our Livewire component is a lot cleaner now, since we have shifted most of the logic to the dedicated form object, and everything else should work just as usual. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try. I'll just open up our project and click on add student. Okay, we have undefined variable sections, so we need to make the necessary change in our blade file as well, since we have defined a dedicated form object. So we need to reference that accordingly in the blade file as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and make that change. And in the wire model name, we don't have a name property in our create student component currently, so we need to reference that from the form object, and the name of the form object in our create student is form, so we need to reference that accordingly. So in this case, this is going to be form.name, and for the email as well, this is going to be form.email, and wire model.live class id, this does not needs to be updated because the class id property exists in the create student livewire component itself. So yeah, that looks good. And for the section id, yeah, we need to go ahead and update that. So this is gonna be form dot section id, and okay, we have the sections related data, and this could cause an issue in here because we don't have this sections property in our create student livewire component, but instead it is defined in the create student form object, that is this one, and we are iterating over the sections related data in here. So let's save that, and I know that we are gonna get an error about this. Let's go ahead and reload. Okay, we get this undefined variable sections. And okay, let's go ahead and give this a try. What if we go ahead and pass in form sections? Okay, that seems to work. We currently don't have any section related data, and if I select class 1, then as you can see, the section A and B are being populated accordingly. Okay, that looks good, and everything else looks good. So let's go ahead and give this a try. Let's look into the flow, whether the records are actually created or not. And I'll just pass in some data in here. Personal blog, select a class, class 5, section B, click on save, and now we are redirected to the index page. And let's go ahead and look into the last record that we just created, personal blog, admin, class 5, section B. Okay, this flow looks good and it's now working fine. And yeah, I did have some issues and confusions about this thing because originally I did not plan to shift the sections variable into the dedicated form object, but I thought of doing that in this lecture. So yeah, that's the reason I got a bit confused. And yeah, it's all about hit and trial sometimes, because when you are trying out new things, you don't really know how to deal with that. And a way to debug that is by trying out different stuffs and figure out which one works. So yeah, this one worked in this case, and yeah, we can use that and reference that. That is any property that is defined on the dedicated object. Then in that case, we can just reference that by calling the form name and the property name. So yeah, you now know that. And in the next part, we'll be looking at defining the dedicated form object for the update form. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, let's go ahead and work on defining a dedicated form object for the update flow. And this is going to be almost similar to the previous video where we defined the form object for this create student livewire component. So yeah, let's define a new form object, and I'll just use the previous command, artisan livewire form create student form instead of create student form. This is gonna be update student form. Let's hit enter and let's navigate to that specific form. And most of the stuff is gonna be taken from the create student form object. So I'll just go ahead and copy these from here and paste that in here. And name, email, section ID, and sections, we need these. And instead of storing the student, we are going to update the student. So I'll just copy this and paste that in here, and I'll just update the method. And just like we did in the create student flow, we will receive the class ID and we will run the validation. And instead of creating the record, we'll just go ahead and update this student, and we will define this student property later, but for now let's go ahead and pass that in and call the update method on this student record. And yeah, there's a few things that we need to do here before actually implementing this flow, because we currently don't have a student record in this object. And yeah, we need to pass that in, and we need a way to set these variables as well, because on the edit flow we need these records: the name, the email, the section ID, and the sections related data should be set so that it gets populated in the edit form. So yeah, we need a way to do that, and let's go ahead and look into the documentation. This is something that is covered in the documentation as well. So yeah, I just want to show you that, and then we will implement the flow for this. So I'll just open up the documentation, and on the documentation, there's a section that says if you want to store the form object for both the create and update form, you can easily adapt it to handle both use cases. And in this case, what this is doing is on the mount method, this is calling the set post method on the form object that is going to set the post model by passing in the specific post as a parameter. And yeah, we'll be making use of this approach to set the model, the student model, and then based on that, we will go ahead and populate the properties of our component. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And in our update student form, let's go ahead and define the method called set student. And here we will receive a model of type student. So make sure to type in that properly. And now what we can do is we can define a new property in here, which is gonna be public student, which is initially gonna be null by default. So let's go ahead and pass that nullable operator as well and import the student model. And initially this is gonna be null, and when we run the mount, then in that flow we will be assigning this model. So yeah, when we call this set student method, what we will do is we'll just go ahead and set the student property that we have in here to the value that we receive from this parameter. And now what we can do is on the update student, okay, let's go ahead and grab the update, okay, not update but edit student component, and we receive this value in here, and we can now get rid of these properties, the name and the email, and we can also remove this section ID and sections property. And on the mount, since we are filling these properties, so what we can do is we can shift these to the form object, and let me paste that here. And in here what we can do is we can just call the form object, and yeah, let's go ahead and first define that form object in here. So public update student form, and here we can reference that form object, this form set student, and we'll just pass in the student that we receive as a parameter. And now we can go ahead and execute the code that is to set the properties of our form object. And yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So we receive the value, and now we can call this fill method, and instead of referencing that as a this student, we can directly reference that as student because we received that value in here, and we will be filling the properties of name, email, and section ID. The class ID is still in the main component, so yeah, we don't need to pass that in. And for the sections as well, we have the sections data in here, so we can grab the sections data from the database where the class ID is this student. We do have the student here, so we can reference that, or we can directly use the student data. And yeah, let's go ahead and do that, and we will get the records. Okay, so this is going to set the student model and then also the properties that we have in here. And once the user clicks on update student, then we are gonna execute the validation. We receive the class ID and run this block of code, which is gonna update the student data. And since we are passing the student model as well, so we do have the student property in here, which is the correct model that is gonna be updated. And okay, we do get the class ID, so yeah, that looks good. And let's now go ahead and copy some stuff from our edit student. So yeah, we can copy this validate block of code and run the validation on the form object itself. And instead of creating or updating the record in here, we can just reference this form and call this update student method. And we also need to pass in the class ID. And now let's go ahead and update that. So yeah, this thing that I mentioned in the previous video as well, the validation related thing. Yeah, I think this is a good convention because we can't really pass in these dynamic statements in the attributes since PHP does not support that. So yeah, this also looks good. And yeah, I think we have implemented the flow now, and yeah, we are referencing that, and then we redirect to the index route. And okay, I think when the class is updated, we need to go ahead and update this code accordingly. So what I will do is I will go ahead and define this set sections method. And okay, I think I have done that already. Okay, I have not done that, so I'll just go ahead and paste that code in here, and also on the create student Livewire component we have that code. So whenever the class ID is updated, we call this form set sections. So I'll just copy that and paste that in the edit student component. So yeah, let's save that, and we have the form. So name here is identical, but yeah, everything else looks good. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try now, and we can remove these unwanted imports from here, and let's go ahead and give this a try now. So on the index page, we have all the data. I want to update this. Okay, not this one, but on the first page, let's go ahead and update this data. Click on edit undefined variable. Okay, we need to make the necessary changes in our blade file as well, which we haven't done yet. So yeah, let's go ahead and work on that. The variable name here of our form object is form. So we can go ahead and make that change by passing in form dot. The same goes for email as well. Okay, not here, but instead form dot email. And for the class ID, this looks good. We don't have to do anything because the class ID lives in the actual Livewire component. And the section ID here is going to be form dot section ID. And okay, one more thing, that is the sections variable. This is defined on the form object, so let's go ahead and reference that accordingly. Form sections, let's save that and let's reload. Okay, that looks good. And okay, we are not passing the class related data. Okay, one more thing that we need to do here is on our edit student, we need to set the class ID. Currently is empty because we are not setting that value in here. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that, and I'll just go ahead and copy this fill method that we have and make that change in here. And here I only want to set the class ID, and let's remove the remaining stuff, and we have this student, so let's reference that accordingly. And now let's go ahead and give this a try. Okay, so the class ID is set, the section ID is set. We get the data about the sections from the database and everything else looks good. Let's go ahead and update the class ID to class 6 and section B. Click on update, and now as you can see, the value is being reflected accordingly. So that means the data got updated in the database as well. So yeah, we are almost done for this video. We extracted the student update logic into a dedicated form object, and the only thing that is remaining here to implement is the record deletion, which we will be working on in the next video. Okay, let's go ahead and work on the record deletion flow, and this is going to be a really simple feature as compared to other videos. We did implement some interesting stuff in the previous videos, but this one is going to be a really simple one because we will just go ahead and delete the records in here by defining a function, by passing in an ID and then deleting the records. So let's go ahead and implement that, and let's open up the list students Livewire component, and here we are displaying the data. And let's go ahead and now define a new method that says delete student, and this is going to receive an ID. So let's go ahead and receive that as well, student ID, and we'll just go ahead and delete the student from the database and then redirect to the index page. Okay, I think we don't even have to redirect because this is going to delete the records and the Livewire component is going to refresh automatically. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try now. We can remove this layout file, and on the list students blade file, let's go ahead and implement that. So when the user clicks on delete button, what do we want to do? So when the user clicks on it, we can go ahead and call the delete student method, and we also need to pass in the ID of the student. So let's go ahead and do that, student ID. And one more thing that we can implement here is the confirmation dialog, because we don't want to let the user delete the record even if they accidentally click on the button, because in this case when the user clicks on it, then it's gonna delete the record directly without any confirmation dialogs. So what we can do here is we can confirm the deletion of the record, and this is something that was recently added to Livewire, and there was a feature to implement custom directives in Livewire, but later it was added to the core. That is this wire confirm feature, and what we can do here is we can pass in the wire confirm directive, and we can even pass in a message that we want to display when the confirmation dialog is shown. So in this case, I want to show, are you sure you want to delete this record? Let's save that, and now whenever the user clicks on this button, then this wire confirm is going to be triggered, and when the user clicks on OK, only then this wire click is going to be triggered, which in turn is going to call this delete student method by passing in the student ID, and that method is going to delete the record. So let's go ahead and give this a try. I'll just go ahead and click on delete, and are you sure you want to delete this record? I'll click on cancel, nothing happens. And when I click on delete again, so we currently have an ID of 1, and if I go ahead and delete this record, then as you can see, Livewire refreshed and the record is now deleted from the database. So if I reload, then as you can see, we don't have the record of ID 1. So yeah, that was actually deleted from the database. So yeah, that's it for this video, and in the next part we'll look at the navigate feature of Livewire, which is gonna let us implement the SPA kind of feature in our Livewire applications. So yeah, we'll be looking into that in the next video. Okay, let's go ahead and look into the wire navigate feature that was introduced in Livewire version 3. And this feature basically lets us enable the SPA kind of experience in our Livewire based applications. And currently, if we go ahead and look into our web app, and if I click on this add student link, then notice the page refresh behavior in here. That is, it takes a full page refresh. The spinner is going to spin, and then it's going to make a whole request to the server, and then the page is served. So yeah, that's the current flow. And if we go ahead and click on the add student button, then this is going to refresh. And yeah, that's the general flow of how web apps work. So yeah, this is the general flow, and what Wire Navigate is going to enable us is to let us enable SPA kind of experiences in our Livewire based applications. So yeah, let's go ahead and implement that. So when I click on this as student, what I want to do is I want to implement the Wire Navigate, which is going to intercept the request and then manually load the page and only update the stuff that is different from this page, and it's gonna render that automatically without the page refresh. So yeah, basically it's gonna intercept the request and then handle that itself under the hood. And yeah, let's go ahead and look into the difference we see when we make the request through Wire Navigate. So in our list students.blade, we have this students.create route. The label here is add student, which is going to navigate to the students.create page. And to implement the Wire Navigate feature, the SPA kind of experience, what we can do is we can just pass in the Wire Navigate directive, and this is going to enable the SPA kind of experience. So if we now go ahead and reload, and again notice this behavior when we click on this button, then as you can see, without any page refreshes, the page was loaded and it was instant. So yeah, the page loads even faster, and yeah, this gives a really good experience to the user as well, since the page loads really fast. And everything else is just the same. We can navigate back and forth between the request, and since this dashboard is a traditional link, that's the reason it took a full page refresh. But when we click on this add student button, then the page is not going to refresh. So yeah, let's go ahead and implement this in other areas as well. When we click on the save button and when we click on this cancel, then we don't want to make a full page refresh, but instead we want to let Livewire implement the SPA kind of experience. And in our create student.blade, when we redirect back to the index page, then in that case as well, we can pass in the navigate true option to this redirect method. So we pass in the route, and then we can pass in the navigate option as true, which is gonna implement the SPA kind of experience. Okay, so this is giving us an error, but if we go ahead and look into the documentation, okay, so we have the form, we have the navigate section in here, and the basic usage here is we can pass in this wire navigate. And okay, let me zoom in a bit. And for the redirects, we can, okay, this should be this redirect instead of the Laravel's redirect. So let's go ahead and pass that in this redirect, and now we don't have that error. And okay, let me just copy this, and I'll just use that in the update student form component. When we update the student data, okay, this is the form, but I want the Livewire component edit student. When we edit the student's data, then we want to redirect to the index page by enabling the SPA experience. And let's also go ahead and implement the same for the cancel button that we have on our list students blade file. So when the user clicks on cancel, okay, not on the list student, but instead on the create student and the edit student. So here we want to enable the wire navigate. Let's also go ahead and do the same for the edit student as well. So here we have this cancel. Let's pass that wire navigate feature. And where else do we need? Okay, so one more thing that I want to do here is on our navigation dot blade. We have not included the link of our students index page. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to copy this dashboard link and make the necessary changes in here. So this is going to go to students.index. And okay, I think I copied the wrong HTML code. Instead of that, this is the one that I want to duplicate. And this is going to go to the students.index. And I also want to highlight this link if the route is students.index. And this is going to be students. Let's save that. And let's also pass in the wire navigate directive to this. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass that in. And since this is a blade component, so whatever attributes we pass to this is going to be merged in the underlying link. So we don't have to worry about that. And there's one more place that we need to update that. That is for the mobile menu. So let's go ahead and do that as well. Okay, where's that? So here we have this X responsive nav link. I'll just copy that and pass that in here as well. So instead of dashboard, this is going to be students.index. Let's also pass in the wire navigate directive, and this is going to be students. Okay, let's save that and let's go ahead and give this a try now. I'll just reload and we have this dashboard, and when I click on this students link, then it should not reload the page, but instead with the SPA experience, it should load the page. Okay, I think that did not work, but if we click on add, then there's no page refresh. If we click on cancel, there's no page refresh. If we click on edit, okay, on the edit link as well, we need to implement that. So let's go ahead and do that. We have list students.blade. When the user clicks on edit, we should implement the wire navigate feature. Let's save that and let's go ahead and reload. Okay, so when I click on edit, then there's no page refresh. Okay, so this seems to work fine. And yeah, I think we are almost done for this section. We implemented the whole CRUD flow for our students, and we looked at how we can display the data, how we can implement the dependent dropdowns. We also implemented the wire navigate feature, and also looked at how to delete these individual records. And we also looked at defining dedicated form objects for our Livewire components to handle the form related stuff. So yeah, I think we learned a lot of stuff in this section itself, and I do have a lot of plans to implement some interesting data tables using Livewire and Alpine.js. And we will be continuing this project in the upcoming section as well, where we will be implementing some interesting data tables. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the upcoming section. Okay, so there are a few things we still need to fix in the students management system, and these issues are related to the extraction of form objects. So when we extracted the form related logic to a dedicated form object, then we forgot to implement some of the stuff based on the form objects extraction. So we did extract the form, but we forgot to make the changes in our implementation. So yeah, I'll go ahead and show you the issues, and then we will fix them one by one. So yeah, let's go ahead and add a new student. Let's try to add a new student, and without typing any data, let's go ahead and just click on save. Then as you can see, nothing is happening here. I don't get any validation messages, or I don't get redirected anywhere. So yeah, this is one of the issues, that is about validations. We don't see the validation messages here, and yeah, nothing is happening. And that's the same for the edit as well. I think the validation is not working in this case as well. If I click on update and if I reload, then as you can see, the name is not in here anymore. So the name was actually stored as an empty value. So yeah, this is something we don't want, and we need to go ahead and fix this. So yeah, let's open up our code editor, and here I have the create student.blade, and I also have the create student Livewire component, and we are validating the class ID. And when we click on add, we have the reference to the form, and we are calling this store student method. We are passing in the class ID along with this. And yeah, let's go ahead and look into this create student.blade first, and let's also remember the name of our form. In this case, the form object is named as form. And if we go ahead and look into our create student.blade, then as you can see, we are referencing this @error name, but we don't have this name property in our Livewire component, but instead we have this defined in our dedicated form object. So yeah, we need to go ahead and fix this, and we can reference this @error. And as you can see, we are not referencing our form objects anywhere. So in case of email as well, we have not referenced that. So let's go ahead and do that. And for the class ID, this is not needed. So I'll just go ahead and skip the class ID. And yeah, we also need to add it for the section ID. So yeah, let's go ahead and add the reference of our form object for all of these properties. And now if we go ahead and reload, okay, let's try to add a new student. Click on save. Then as you can see, the name field, the email address, and the section related data is displayed. But okay, we also need to reference this in here. Let's save that, and let's try to save that again. So now these are working. But what about this? The class ID is not working here. So yeah, this is also one of the issues that I wanted to address here. And this is happening because let's look into the flow in here. When we add the student, then we directly call this form and then the store student. But we have the class ID defined in the Livewire component itself. And when we navigate to the store student method, in here we are validating the data, and based on the method where we are calling, so in our store student method of the form object, we are calling this validate method. So this is going to validate only the properties that are defined in this form object. And yeah, for the class ID, it's not going to run that validation because that property is not defined in here. So yeah, to fix this, what we can do is, instead of calling this validate in this form object, we can go ahead and validate these data in the parent Livewire component. Before we actually call this form store student, we can go ahead and call this validate. And the way Livewire works, it's automatically gonna validate this property and all the properties that we have defined in our form object. So yeah, this is now going to work. And if we now go ahead and reload and click on save, then as you can see, the validation for class ID is also working, and for all the other fields is also working. So yeah, this is the pattern that I want you to use when you are developing Livewire applications. So yeah, adding a validation in the root method doesn't cost much. We just validate and only then perform any other stuff that we want in our applications. So yeah, this looks good. And let's also go ahead and make this change in our update component, that is this update student form. Let's navigate to the edit student.blade, and let's go ahead and reference our form object in here as well. And the name of our form is referenced as form. So yeah, this looks good. Let's go ahead and reference these properties in here, and I'll skip the class ID because we have this defined in the root Livewire component. So I'll skip that, and let's reference the class ID as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and now reference our form object in here, and let's go ahead and give this a try. Okay, so let's open up our update student form as well. And here we are setting the student. And while we call update student, we are validating the email. And along with that, we also need to validate the class ID. So what we can do here is we'll just remove this validation check from here and implement that on the root Livewire component. Let's define that in here. And let's go ahead and give this a try now. I'll click on edit and let's try to update this record. Okay, no property found for validation email. So what can we do in here? So yeah, in cases like these, instead of defining the email on the dedicated form object, and I think this is a rare case because we have to define one property in the root component and other properties in the dedicated form object. And again, this was working in the create form because we did not have to manually pass this email. But in this case, we have to do it because we have this student ID, which we want to ignore. So yeah, for cases like these, what we can do is we can define this property in the root component itself. So let's go ahead and do that. On the update student form, we have the email. So let's get rid of this from here. And we will be filling the data for the name. We can get rid of email from here. And while updating the student, we can receive the email as well. And we can reference that in here. So let's do that. And everything else looks good. So let's go ahead and make the necessary changes in Livewire component. Let's go ahead and add this property in here. And okay, so we have the email and we are validating this manually in here. We are passing the validation data in here, and we can reference this email now while we update the student. So let's go ahead and pass that in here, this email, and yeah, this should now work. So let's go ahead and give this a try. Let's look into our update student form once again. We are filling these data, and since we have defined the email and class ID, so we need to go ahead and fill the email data in here. Okay, let's save this and let's reload. Okay, we don't have the name and email now. So what could be the issue? So we set the student and then we go ahead and fill the class ID and email from this student, but this is not working. And when we try to update, okay, this is not working because we need to make the changes in here. So instead of form.email, this is going to be just email. So let's go ahead and remove that. Okay, this is email address. This is going to be wire modeled to the email, and let's also remove the form prefixes. Let's save that. And okay, now this is working, but the name property is not working here. And yeah, let's look into that form.name. We have the edit student and we are filling the class ID and email in here. And on the update student form, we have the name and we are filling that in here. Okay, in our database as well, this name is empty, so that could be the reason. Let's try to pass in some name. Click on update. Let's reload, and okay, this is not working again. So let's try to look into our database. I'll open up phpMyAdmin and let's try to log in. The name of our database is Livewire Alpine data tables. Like, let's look into the students table, and okay, the name is empty in here. And since the validation is now working, so that could be the reason we are not able to store the student's name. So let's go ahead and manually pass this for now, and then we will look into the issue. Okay, so we have the name now. Let's open up our project, and now we have the name, but for some reason the validation for the name is not been displayed. So what we can do here is when we update the student, what are we doing? Okay, we are validating the email, and let's again look into our edge_student.blade. Okay, so we are referencing the form wire modeled to the form error form.name, but this is still not working. Let's look into our edge_student again. We have the reference as form, and we are defining the class ID and email in the Livewire component. We call this set student, and then we pass the student data, and then we fill the name and the section. Okay, let's go ahead and look into this student data. What do we have in here? And the reason I'm showing you all of these is because I also want to show you how I debug things so that you can get some idea about this. And okay, update student must not be accessed before initialization. Okay, when we click on update, let's go ahead and dd the student, and we just want to dd the model. And when we click on update, okay, the validation is not actually working in this case. The name is still empty. How is that possible? Okay, I think we again went ahead and passed in an empty name to this, so that could be the reason. Let's pass update, and okay, we still don't have that name. So what's actually happening in here? Okay, when we click on the update student, we validate the record, and then we will call this form update student. We pass in the class ID and we pass the email. So before that, let's go ahead and look into this student data. And for now, I'll just go ahead and manually add a name to this student, because yeah, this is causing some issues. And now if we go ahead and reload and click on update, and okay, we have the name, we have the email and everything else. And when we click on the update student, we pass the class ID and the email to this. So let's go ahead and grab the class ID and the email. We don't need the student ID in here, so let's go ahead and do that. And when again we click on it, okay, we are still getting this because we have to remove this. Click on update, and we have the class ID and email. But why is the validation not working? So when we click on the update, we don't have the validation in here, and we have defined the name and the section ID in here. And on our edit student, we have the name as form.name and the error as form.name. So yeah, this should work. And for the email, this looks good. Let's save this, and let's remove the email and click on update. Okay, we are getting this validation error, but for the name, let's update, and validation is not working for the name. Okay, let's look into this. On our update student form, we have validate required to the name as well, and setting the name and section ID is working, and we grab the sections related data as well. And when we click on the submit button, we call the update student method, and we pass in this validate, which is validating the class ID and the email. Let's try to look into this. Okay, the class ID field is required incorrect integer value for column class ID at row 1. So is this thing not working? When I click on update, then we are getting this error because the validation is being triggered, but still we are able to update the record. So what's actually happening in here? Okay, so let's look into this flow once again, because I know this is taking a lot of time, but I just wanted to show you this, but yeah, it's taking a lot of time. So we have this, and when we click on submit, then we navigate to this update student method, which is defined in here, and then we go ahead and validate the record. And since we are passing in this email, so I think only the validation for the email is happening, or what's actually happening in here. Okay, and for the class ID as well, we have the validation. And when we now go ahead and click on update, again, this update student method is being called in here. And why is that happening? Okay, I think I got an idea now. So since we have the class ID and email defined in here, and we are only validating the email this way, and we are passing this validation as an attribute in here. So instead of passing it like this, let's go ahead and define that validation in here. Let's pass the class ID as required in here itself without the attribute method. And if we now go ahead and reload and select a class, then okay, so this is not throwing an error, but if we click on update, then now as you can see, the validation error is thrown now. And when that passes, when this validation passes, then we navigate to this update student. Let's go ahead and DT something in here. Let's see whether we get the validation error in here or not for the name and the section ID. Let's see whether this method will be called or not when we pass the first validation check. And if we reload, and I'll just go ahead and remove the sum name and click on update, and as you can see, the class ID is called here. So yeah, this thing has some issues, and this is something that I just figured out. When we are calling this validate and passing one method to this, then the attributes related stuff don't work. That is, the attributes related validations don't work. So in that case, you have to manually pass all of the validation rules. And again, once this check passes, if you have a dedicated form, and in there, if you want to validate these properties as well, then you need to go ahead and define this validate in here as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and give this a try now. And once that validation passes, I just want to go ahead and pass a DD in here. Let's see whether this validation is thrown or this code will be dumped. Let's check this out. Let's reload. I'll remove this, and if I click on update, and now the validation for the name is being triggered. So yeah, this took a lot of time, but I hope that this was worth it. And yeah, we have finally fixed the issues that we had in our students management project. And yeah, this is something that I did not anticipate to happen, because I just found out about the form related issues that we had while we implemented this last time, and that is in the previous video, and I thought of fixing that up, but I did not think that these weird issues might happen while trying to fix this simple issue. Okay, one last thing that I want to include here is when we update the student data, when we validate this and when we update the record, then what's going to happen? So we did not actually add a redirect here. So yeah, let's go ahead and add that, and we have that in our add student method. Let's copy that and let's paste that in here. And I know that you can go ahead and fix this yourself, but I still wanted to complete this whole flow. So yeah, this now looks good. And for some reason, we are getting this error that the redirect method is not found in here. And okay, we don't have to add anything in here. So yeah, this looks good. So yeah, I think this was a good debugging session, and I hope that you learned some new stuff along the way. We looked at some weird validation issues that might happen when we have some properties defined in the Livewire component and some other defined in the form object. So in that case, you have to go ahead and define the validations for each of these methods. So in the dedicated form object as well, and even in the Livewire component as well, at least for now. Let's see. Livewire team might fix this in the future, but for now, yeah, there's a workaround, and we can definitely fix these issues by figuring it out ourselves. So yeah, that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.